life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. All my life, and all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
So sorry, I was a little confused, which is not surprising most of the time. If we could just take a seat. So this is our last day together, and I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little tired. But with our last day, I just really feel like the Lord is like, press into this. This is our last time together, and He has a lot He still wants to say to us. So we're going to be watching a clip, well, actually a teaching by Dr. Tom Bloomer. And for some of us who don't know who Tom is, he was our former provost of the university. He's also the son-in-law of the late Howard Malmsted. And he is one of the most amazing men of God that we have had the privilege of being around. And this particular teaching is really, really good. But I know for some of us, especially some of us who are maybe younger, this teaching of transformational versus transactional leadership might feel like it's, well, that's for the leaders up here. It doesn't apply to me. But I really want to encourage you to look at this and go, what is my leadership like? What kind of leader I am? And I've spoken before of this idea that we have to be self-aware. All of us have to be first self-aware before we can be other-aware. And this is an incredible teaching of saying, how is my leadership? So what I want us to do is to make sure that as we listen, we don't keep it up here, but we ask the Lord to drop it in to our spirit. To say, wait a minute, do I do that? Am I transactional? So I speak from experience, because when I don't get my way, I think I'm a fairly easygoing person, but when I get stressed and I need things done, I become a little dictator. And I know this about myself. So I have to really fight that. Oftentimes I want to get things done, and then it's like, you know what, actually, Yolene, do it this way, because I've asked you to do it that way. Okay. So I just want us to really, as we listen to Tom, that we would really ask the Lord, what is it in his teaching that I could take away? And I think for some of us who are in maybe visible top leadership, to go back to listening to this, and some of us have heard this a few times, for us to also listen and go, do I still do that? In wanting to get things done, do I err on the side of transactional? Because we are in the business of discipling people, and how do we disciple? So that's just an introduction. I try to keep it short for Terry.
Hi, I'm Tom Bloomer. We're filming this at the Lausanne base in Switzerland. Today I want to talk to you about leadership. I've been in YWAM leadership roles since the end of 1975 and did my dissertation on YWAM leaders actually. And I find that we don't understand what leadership really is. I believe that if God is love, then leadership must be a manifestation of love. Our topic today is leadership. And it's of course a very important subject for us all because we have all been under leaders. We are all leaders in some way. And leadership is the greatest source of hurt in many people's lives, going back to their parents, or the greatest source of blessing. And I'd like to invite you to think about the leaders who have been a real positive influence in your life, and also think about why. What did they do that was different than some of the others that may have been more negative experience? So it's important that we think biblically about leadership. And ever since I started getting into this topic, it was during my doctoral studies in the 90s. For one class on leadership, I had to read several books and articles, all on, supposedly on a biblical view of leadership. And I found not one that could tell me what servant leadership really was. And I find this true even in YWAM, that we lead out of our cultural models of leadership. Although we talk about being a Christian leader, what we actually practice and even sometimes what we teach is very much a cultural model. We've been convicted by the Lord in YWAM International that our model of leadership was too much based on the business world. And we intentionally have dropped that vocabulary from our leadership structure. But let me give you a way of looking at leadership that has really helped me. And I've been sharing this since 1998, 17 years now, and it's helped a lot of other people as well. And it goes back to the most useful leadership teaching I got in my graduate studies, which was from a guy named James McGregor Burns. And he came up with this, I believe in the 70s, if I remember right, and it was what he called, there are two types of leadership. And let's go through his vocabulary because it gives us a way of talking about leadership that, as I say, has been very helpful in YWAM and in other Christian organizations. And he said traditional leadership in the past was what he called transactional. In other words, the whole model is based on transactions. And it's a power-based model. And the word for power in Greek is dunamis. It's the same word we get dynamite from. And it's very much the leader is in charge and he is in control and he tells people what to do. I do not think that leadership should be thought of as telling people what to do. Although sometimes we have to do that as leaders, and sometimes I do that in my leadership role in the university. But this method really works by force. You're forcing people to do things that they often don't want to do. And the force for us is not physical, but it's every bit as much force as physical force is. You tell people what to do, where to go, you give them a direction to follow. And the model, and they wrote leadership books about this in the 80s, the model for the Christian organization was a factory, and the leader was the engineer of the factory. And in this factory model, you get stuff in at one end of the factory, there's a process, and you have an output at the other end of the factory. And they said this is what a Christian organization is like. This is like a mission. You get people in, you get understanding in and how to do missions, and there's a process of preaching the gospel, and out the other end you have churches. And this is very much a factory model, and people are treated like machines And there's no difference for an engineer between a person in a factory and a machine, except usually that the machines are better cared for because they're more expensive. And the job is all about transactions. In other words, I have something you want and need, you have something I want and need. So I will give you my time and my skills, and you will give me a job, which usually includes money, not always. And it also includes a certain social status and a place in society. So we are doing a transaction in our job. And we monitor each other in how well that transaction is going. In other words, another way to look at it is reciprocal concessions. I concede my time and effort to you, you concede some of your money to me. And there are contracts. Not all of these contracts are written down. Usually they are, even within YWAM, but if they're not written down, they're implicit, they're there, they're understood. And there are guarantees. You have to be here a certain number of hours a week, you have to show up at a certain time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it's an authoritarian model. The people who are leading are very much in charge. In French, we still say, and we used to say it in English, they are my superiors. I hate that language. I just hate it. Because nobody is superior to anyone else. We all have the same value before God. And it doesn't matter, our place on a flow chart does not make us superior to anyone. And then McGregor Burns said there's another type of leader, he called it the newer type, the transformational leader. And he said this type of leader is very different and works very differently. And he doesn't exercise power, but he has authority, or she has authority. And the word for authority in Greek is exousia. So when Jesus ascends into heaven, he gives his disciples exousia. He says, all exousia, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth, therefore go into the nations and make disciples of all nations. And this word is mistranslated in certain languages as if there were no difference between authority and power. Well, there's a great deal of difference. And the simplest illustration is when a policeman stands on a street and holds up his hand and stops a truck, he's not doing that because of power, because the truck has the power to run right over him. But the policeman's doing that because he has authority. And that uniform and that badge gives him the authority to stop any vehicle. So they're very different concepts, and we should be careful in our translations. And if you're studying this, I'd encourage you to look up the Greek. And some people misunderstand this when they get hold of the concept of transformational leader. They think, well, that means I'm not a strong leader. Wrong. Wrong, because who is the greatest transformational leader of all time? It's Jesus, right? And he is a very strong leader, but very transformational. But in this model, the leader works through influence. Not power, not telling people what to do. Leadership is not telling people what to do all the time, and leadership is not talking all the time either. Some leaders think that they lead by talking. Well, of course we have to talk as leaders, and as Lauren says, we lead through teaching in YWAM, but it's very much an influence. And the first part of that influence as a leader has to be modeling. In other words, we model what we are asking people to do. We do it, and then we ask them to follow along in our example. So if we want people to be on time, we have to be on time. If we want them to be at certain places, we are there too, et cetera, et cetera. It's very much a modeling thing to start with. And then the other part that's so important is a vision. We give a vision for people to pursue. Now, any leader can be visionary, and even transactional ones. Adolf Hitler was one of the greatest visionary leaders of the 20th century. He had a 1,000-year vision for his nation. But the transformational leader also is visionary and calls people to imagine with him a certain vision of the future. And that's what vision is. It's a potential reality of the future that we can help to shape starting now. And the leader says, come with me, follow me, work with me, and we will shape the future together. And of course we do that through our obedience to what the Lord has told us to do and through our prayers. But the stating and restating and clarifying and deepening of the vision are a very important part of leadership. And one mistake I have made in my leadership is to think that if I've shared a vision once, then I don't have to share it again. And that's not true. And a lot of people say you need to restate the vision and reshare the vision a couple times a year in your organization. Some even say once every 3 months you need to lay out the vision again. And the model here is not an engineer in a factory, it's more a politician in a community. Now for most of us, I would say politician is not a positive term. But, and that's because there's so much wrong leadership in the nations. So much unjust leadership through politicians. But the point is that in a democracy at least, the politician is there because the people have chosen that person. And everyone agrees that that person should be in that leadership role. Whether it's in the parliament, in a nation where judges are elected, or the executive is elected. So in YWAM, we are all agreed that Lauren should be in the role that he has, still leading our mission after 55 years now. And we never voted whether Lauren should be our founder or not. That's a joke. But we still have a very broad and unanimous consensus that Lauren and Darlene should be our leaders. So that's our model. And with the vision, along with the vision, the leader shares a life program. In other words, values are very important. We're going to this direction, to that goal, and this is how we do it. So you have more and more companies in the business world very much onto this model, because it motivates their workers. And sometimes we think, oh, in YWAM it's so hard because we have to work with volunteers and they can leave anytime. Well, that's no different from the business world. The turnover in the restaurant and hotel business is 80 to 90% of employees every year in many nations. And Peter Drucker, one of the main management teachers to the business world it was probably the 80s where he had his most influence. He studied volunteer organizations and he told the business world, you guys should treat people the way those organizations treat their volunteers, because they're keeping their people and motivating their people a lot better than you are. So we do work with volunteers in YWAM, but that's a blessing. That means it should improve our leadership style. So as I said, many companies are saying we're selling this stuff, but we're doing it in a way that benefits the planet. Then there are other companies, more and more actually, who are saying, come and work with us. We have a value of getting along together and having fun at our company. So they will not hire disagreeable people. And part of the interview process is not just some person working in human resources. Your work team, who you will be working with, interviews you also. And they have to accept that you come into the team. It's not, the company won't send someone that they've never met to work in their team, because the team dynamic is so important and such a high value in that company. So the other members of the team interview you as well as the human resource person. And they will not hire disagreeable people. I think that's great. We should do that in YWAM. Not that anyone listening to this message is one of those people, of course. So part of the value and the vision is transformation. Come work with us and you will be transformed. The planet will be transformed. We will all be transformed. You will be transformed. So there's also an opportunity for individual growth. You've probably heard that recently the director of Starbucks, has promised every employee that they can have their university tuition paid by the company if they sign up with the online University of Arizona program. They already gave every employee health insurance, which is rare in the States, including part-time employees. And now they've told everyone you can get a university education. And this is a model that many other companies are studying, because Starbucks wants, their coffee frankly isn't that great, but what they want is that you are motivated to come back because the barista is such a friendly person. They know your name, they know the coffee you order every time, and that's how they get people coming back into their stores and paying more than their coffee is worth, frankly. So I'm not against Starbucks. I go into their stores too, but that's what's going on at that company. So you may have a contract, but what's more important is it's a commitment. You are committed to these people, to this vision, to this set of values. And they are committed to you, as I said, for your personal transformation as well. And of course, there's a great deal of freedom in this, because the employees, everyone actually, is so highly motivated that people are free in their jobs, and they're not locked in like they would be as a machine in a factory. So when you line these up together, you can see that we're looking at a very different type of organization. And what this is actually two different views of humanity, of human beings. Because one looks at the human being as a machine, as a source of what I want. The other one looks at him as a fellow human with just as much value as I have. So the transactional organization looks like this. And think of the organization that you have been part of, your different schools, your different jobs, maybe your different churches, YWAM bases, groups. A transactional organization has many rules, and the emphasis is on compliance, is on obeying those rules. There's little tolerance for diversity. People tend to dress alike, talk alike, and people who are very different are not welcome. There's also an emphasis on hierarchy, on who is in charge of whom. The lower downs on the organizational flow chart are treated differently from the higher ups. There are privileges, there are reserved parking spaces, executive dining rooms, et cetera, et cetera. And because the leadership model is high on control, one passive control method is withholding information. So the leaders do not share what's going on in and around the community. Decisions are announced, not processed. It's leadership by announcement. You can go to a staff meeting and hear an announcement that will change your life or ministry forever, and you have not been included in that decision. You have not even been informed before the staff meeting that that decision has been made. This is wrong, friends. Do not just decide people's lives all by yourselves in your little leadership group and announce it to them. And loyalty overcomes truth in this organization. Loyalty is much more valued than truth is. So truth tellers are obliged to leave the organization because they come to the leadership with the truth of something that's wrong, that's unjust, that may be even against the law, and that's seen as disloyalty. They're called truth tellers in organizations. We call them in the church prophets. But in a transactional organization, the prophets are not welcomed. In the time of the, much of the time of the people of God, they were stoned between the altar and the entrance of the temple, Jesus said. So the truth teller is obliged to leave the organization, not welcomed, or some places kicked out. And that's a very dangerous place for an organization to be in, because the prophets are the ones who see not just the vision. The prophets are visionary also. The apostles see the vision, but the apostles see it so clearly that they are tempted to get there by taking shortcuts. And the prophet's focus is on how to get there. It's on doing things not just God's will for the future, but God's way. And Lauren has said over and over that the prophets are needed by apostles because the prophets give accountability to the visionary ministry of the apostles. So when the prophets or the truth tellers have to leave, then the organization loses its clarity on the ways of God, and injustice can multiply. And there are many, many, many examples of this in the business world and in the church. And in churches where it's essentially a one-family leadership thing, it's especially dangerous. They just went through this in the Church of Korea, unfortunately, where the pastor of the largest church was not holding his son accountable. And his son went through 3 marriages and 3 divorces, started 5 businesses with church money, and each one of them went bankrupt. The son finally ended up in jail, and the father was convicted also of collusion in the crime, but because of his age and because he didn't really probably understand what was going on, he was given a suspended sentence. A very sad episode in the church in Korea. Shook the nation, as a matter of fact. But there was no prophetic person there next to that apostle, apparently, to hold him accountable. He didn't hold his son accountable, and the whole thing was a major mess. Any leadership team will talk about accountability. Very few of them actually do it in comparison. Here's a question we've learned to ask young leaders who want to join us. And this is it. Who can tell you no? To whom in your life have you given the right to say no? Don't do that. Or stop doing that. And that has to be a right you give someone. And that means you're going to listen to them. Who are you really going to listen to? Who you can trust to tell you no if you're getting off. If there is no one like that, you're in a very dangerous position. And we're not sure that we want you to join YWAM unless you accept that accountability factor, that we're going to tell you no when you're getting off. In this organization, the transactional organization, there's also a huge emphasis on departments and compartments. It's the silo structure of an organization. In other words, you walk into an office, you ask for some help, and they say, no, that's not my job. I ran into this in my seminary, and I was a part-time student at first. I had never had an orientation to the campus. I didn't know how things worked. I would go into the office I thought I should be in, and they would say, no, that's not my department. And they'd look back to their computers. They wouldn't even tell me where I should be going. It was just, no, that's not my department. That's not my job. You can leave. And I found that very frustrating. I'm sure you've run into this as well. The transformational organization, on the other hand, it looks very, very different. And there, because it's a low control model, and we have probably the lowest control of just about any organization in the world, we are certainly the most decentralized organization in the world. In this model, personal initiative is encouraged. And that's very liberating, of course. People love to work in this kind of organization where if they get an idea of something that could be done, they go ahead and do it. And YWAM is still, in most of our operating locations, the ministry where it's the easiest of all to start a new thing, start a new ministry. That's not true of all of our operating locations, unfortunately, but it's true of most of them. And this model is not as marked by control, as I said, but by trust. And there's trust at all levels. The leaders trust the followers trust the leaders. Fulfillment of each worker is a stated goal. And this means practically on our basis that workers should be encouraged to continue their education. Every single staff member should be encouraged to have a study program, a growth program, through seminars, through our U of N schools, through other types of stuff. It doesn't have to be YWAM or U of N. It can be a personal program, but it should be a program where you're studying and learning and growing in what you do. Creativity and diversity are promoted, are encouraged in this organization. As a matter of fact, one of the factors of the creativity of a team is the diversity of the team. So studies have shown this over and over, that the more a team is diverse in its gender, age, nationality, linguistic background, personality type, that diversity leads to more creativity. And that's one reason that we are also the most creative organization in the world. Young people and anyone divergent is promoted, not only welcomed into the organization, but promoted. This is why we have a lot of divergent people in YWAM, because they're not welcome in some other organizations. People are not controlled by rules, but they're encouraged to apply principles. This is the principle we go by, okay, you apply it. And as we said before, the leader is not the superior. The leader is a co-worker. One of the most successful companies back in the 90s was Intel, and Andy Grove ran it, a Hungarian refugee, first from the Nazis, then from the Marxists. He was a brilliant guy, a genius actually. Came up with these chips that powered almost everybody's computers. But he, even though he was genius level, he was founder of the company, director of the company, no assigned parking place for him. He got the closest place every morning because he was the first to show up. And all the offices were the same. He had the same size office as everyone else. And he was sending a powerful message throughout his company. I am not your superior. You are my equal. I value you, and I need your creativity just as much as the company needs my creativity. So in this type of organization, information is available to all. More and more companies are putting their financial information on their websites so that their employees can see them. And there is mutual accountability. It's not just that the worker is accountable to the boss, but evaluations are done at a 360-degree evaluation, they call it. So you are evaluated, your performance, by your leaders, by your followers, and by your peers. It's a full circle, 360-degree accountability. I am the international provost of the University of the Nations, but I'm on a first-name basis with everyone. I taught in a school last week, and I think all the students were in their 20s, just about. And I finally persuaded all of them except one young man that they should call me Tom. So I understand that in some cultures, an older, white-haired person, it's hard for us to use first names, but nevertheless, we do that as a rule in the organization in order to make the statement that it's not about a hierarchy, it's not about people being more important than someone else. And we want to be accessible, and we want to be open to the truth. We're going to work on a way in our new university record system so that every student can evaluate their school, and that we will know in university leadership much more of what is actually happening in each school, and that the evaluation will not just be the student getting a grade from the staff, but the student will be evaluating the staff and the school. Now, in many bases we do this already, but we're going to put it in the system so that we can do it worldwide. Decisions here are never announced, but they are processed. It doesn't mean that everybody decides. That's a recipe for a very slow decision-making process. And even Japanese companies who used to work like this have abandoned it because you cannot make a decision fast enough in this rapidly changing world if everyone decides. But everyone can participate, and that's all most people want. They want to know that they have been heard. But a small group usually has to do the decisions, and then they can say, thank you everybody for your input over this last week or this last month. We've appreciated all of it. there's been a difference of opinion, and we have decided we're going to go this way. We understand the reasons that the people thought we shouldn't go that way, and we have evaluated those and appreciate that input, but this is our decision. And if people know they've been heard, that's all they care about. They will go with the decision. The way we do this in YWAM is, for example, when we got the name, the Lord gave me the name University of the Nations, the new name for our university, which was originally called Pacific and Asia Christian University. That was accepted by the 200 leaders in that room where Lauren was leading this process in Manila in 1989, I think it was. But still, we put the name out because this is such an important decision. We put it out around the world through our leadership teams and said, every staff member, please pray about this. Is this the name? I think it was a 3-month process. The name was not final until everyone had had a chance to process and pray about it. And nobody disagreed, which is a huge miracle, and it shows it was from God. So there's participation in the decisions, but still the leaders have to decide. The small group that carry that responsibility have to decide. The structure is de-emphasized. We don't care about the structure. In the beginning of the university, when people were still getting used to the idea, people would say, well, we want to pay our student fees, where do we send them? And some people were in the university were running a very rigid program of who, from which nation had to send these little fees where. And I said, no. I said, send them wherever you want to. We'll sort it out. We don't care. Just do it, and we'll sort out the structure later. And that's exactly what happened. But the structure needs to fit the vision. The structure is not the most important thing. And a lot of leaders think it is, and when they want to change things, they decide to restructure, to change the structure. Now that usually doesn't make a whole lot of difference, or it shouldn't anyway. And it should be definitely flexible and change when it needs to, especially with growth. There's a great respect for the individual here. The individual is valued as if that person were created in the image and likeness of God. That's a neat thought, isn't it? And if we really believed that, we would treat people differently. And of course, this organization, as I said before, is visionary. It's definitely visionary. And everybody knows the vision, understands the vision, understands the outwork of the vision at the local base level, at the national level, as well as Lauren's overall vision, which of course is related to the ultimate vision, which John saw and wrote down for us in the book of the Revelation. Well, I was studying this stuff and thinking, wow, this is pretty good. This McGregor Burns guy, he got a lot of things right. And then I was in these doctoral studies and still maintaining my leadership role in the university. I was associate provost at that time through the 90s. And then I was thinking, I heard someone else talking about 2 types of leaders. I've heard this before. Where is that? And finally, I slowed down enough in my studies to remember who that was, and that was Jesus. That would be Jesus, who talked about 2 types of leaders. And I think we have so underestimated his words in this passage in Matthew chapter 20, and of course also his example.